We are talking today with Flores Forbes. Flores Forbes is the Chief Strategic Officer at Abyssinian Development Corporation in New York City and author of the new book, Will You Die With Me? My Life and the Black Panther Party. Start out and tell us what was the motivation in writing your book, Will You Die With Me?
Okay. Well, it was very personal in the beginning. I have 18 years of experience that I can't put on my resume. I was in the Black Panther Party for 10 years. I was a fugitive for 3 years, and I was in prison for 5 years. So it was pretty difficult with my professional development with regards to my resume beginning in 1985. To explain what was I doing before that. And this is kind of the culmination of a search, a little bit of therapy. A little bit of me coming to grips with there was something that I did learn out of those 18 years. I needed to explore that. I needed to put that down on paper. And so I started writing probably around 1996, just making some notes and putting stuff down. And then eventually I thought I had a real story to tell, and then so I finally, I got a publisher, sold it, and here I am.
Tell us, what was the circumstances that brought you to choosing to join the Black Panther Party?
A few things happened to me when I was growing up in San Diego, California. I was kidnapped by the police when I was 12 years old, and was beat up by them when I was 14 years old. And I guess I was searching for that. I was looking to be delivered in a lot of different ways, and I think we all do that in different types of ways. Some people find maybe it's the Boy Scouts, maybe it's church or the Boys Club or something like that. But for me, in 1968, it was the Black Panther Party. That spoke volumes to me about this is a way for me to, because I was, I had been terrorized most of my life, as had many African Americans in this country, and you're looking for a way to satisfy, that need for safety. In many ways, people turn to drugs. Some people turn to alcohol. Also, when they're trying to get rid of that pain. And I wanted to stay sober, and I wanted to make sure that I understood what was going on with my life. So I went to the Black Panther Party because I thought that was the way for me to kind of channel this energy. In the beginning, I was just 16 years old. I wasn't sure this was really it, and probably didn't realize that it was it until I was around 18 years old.
Talk about what it was like when you first joined. Did you get to choose to a degree what you wanted to work on?
No. There were some basic programs. Usually everybody starts selling newspapers, the involvement in the programs kind of evolved because there weren't very many programs early on. But as I was there as the years kind of moved through, I worked on the free breakfast program for school children. I worked as a community news reporter for the newspaper. And those were the basic programs that were in Southern California. When I was eventually transferred to Oakland, I was involved in obviously more programs, the free food giveaways, our voter registration drives. I worked at our school, the Oakland Community School, and the International Youth Institute, and kind of, worked through most of the programs. There were maybe about a dozen that I was involved with. And eventually was someone who was being groomed to move into more of a kind of a leadership role, and so that happened, and then I got involved in the more on the military side of the organization, which is kind of, it's not like you just show up and, even if you're say a Vietnam combat vet, you come back and you say, hey, I'm ready to get down and do this and that, that would be met with suspicion more than anything else. But I had kind of, earned my keep and that sort of thing. And worked my way up into the organization, and over the years, and eventually becoming the assistant chief of staff, and responsible for the day-to-day operations of the organization. Responsible for the kind of covert operations, the military side, the security of the leaders and stuff like that. So it was a process. It took, it was over a 10-year period, and I guess it became a profession that I there was no school I could go to except that school there. You know what I mean? And so I kind of evolved into that.
So talk about some of the challenges that you would have to deal with on a daily basis.
Okay. Well, I mean, probably most of them were dealing with execution, making sure that I picked the right personnel to be involved in different projects or operations, that sort of thing. There were there was the police departments, there was the FBI, there was AT, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division of the Treasury Department, who were not really obstacles. It was about how you dealt with them mentally. You're either going to be scared and you were going to stop, or you were going to accept this is part of your lifestyle. They're going to harass you. They've already killed some of your friends, and you know that as you become more and more important, that you probably are going to become a target. And that's part of what you accept. It has a lot to do with, say, the title of the book, Will You Die With Me, which is it's a Buddhist question, but it's a commitment that you're making where the fear, that I had at one time kind of went away when I was 18 years old. And so most of the obstacles, basically the obstacles become you. You know what I mean? Are you really going to work as hard as you can and not, say, take advantage of the luxuries that may come your way as someone who is part of the leadership of the organization?
As we now can see from documents that have come out, one of the threats obviously is being infiltrated by all the different organizations, government organizations. Was that a significant problem, and did that create, like paranoia?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I guess the paranoia of being, discovered or found out can be something that you create, because it depends on what it is you're doing. I think that the FBI infiltration, and maybe there were some local police agencies and stuff like that, we pretty much figured that out after a while, and we implemented some policies that were pretty archaic that would help us kind of screen us. But one of the major ways was to have people, you were involved in mostly political work most of the time. The agents weren't there to do that. They wanted to get into the nitty-gritty kind of stuff and find out where all the guns were and that sort of thing. And you're not going to do that while you're working on free breakfast programs or maybe working as a janitor at our school or something like that. So which were many of the jobs that we had. One of the ways we instituted a policy to keep the agents out was most of them had been men. And if there had been any women agents, I never really knew that. So we had a policy that the women in the organization couldn't date men outside of the organizations. And it's kind of backfired on us years later, but that was one of the ways that we were able to do that. But I think the paranoia or the kind of security consciousness was something that, or vigilance, is something that you maintain, and you kept that regardless if there was any immediate threat or not.
How did the communities where you were based, how did they receive the Black Panther Party?
Many of them received us very well. I remember there was a Lou Harris poll back in either it was between 69 or 72 where there was an overwhelming majority of people who had been polled who supported the ideals of the Black Panther Party. We had a more favorable rating among black males between like 18 and 42 or something along those lines. My parents had a problem with the organization initially, and they grew up in the Jim Crow South, and their major concern was that, I could get lynched. I kind of laughed at that sort of thing. I'm like, this is not the South, or this is not 1940s, 1950s, but it didn't necessarily mean lynching. Didn't necessarily mean you had to have a rope around your neck. You know what I mean? There are other ways for that to happen, and I understood what their concerns were. We at one time had alienated ourselves from the community because of the uniform, the leather jackets, the berets, and the kind of military type gear. And so we realized that we needed to change that. So we did. We were conscious of our relationship to the community, trying to bring them in. We worked a lot with faith-based organizations, the churches in the community, and that sort of thing. So I think that there was a lot of support, but I think that I remember this elderly black woman used to tell me, she said, y'all really need to be careful because you guys are going to get us killed. That was an interesting thing that happened to me that I always remembered. There was this woman who was saying this, and she had just gotten like a free bag of groceries and that sort of thing. But the fact that she said us was an interesting point. I think that because many of us, we were their children. We were their cousins, we were their sons, and that sort of thing, and brothers and sisters. So I never really know how much support we really had in the community. It's just that I remember that there was quite a bit.
What was the stated mission of the Black Panther Party?
We had a 10-point platform and program that was created from a survey that the founders, Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale, had put together back in 1966, and it dealt with self-determination, full employment, an end to the exploitation of our community by the capitalists, a decent education that would educate you about what is going on in this society, a call for juries of our peer groups for black men and women who were going to prison, and a call to review the sentences and the status of people's convictions, who were in prison, because we felt that many of them were in there unjustly. And I guess, we focused on, the final point was like we wanted land, bread, housing, clothing, justice, and peace. But we also were calling for a United Nations plebiscite to investigate the United States' behavior towards African Americans historically in this country, up from 1619 all the way up until the present time. So that was the major piece, and out of those we pulled different planks that created different programs. Point number 7 was the one that attracted me to the organization, which we want to immediately end the police brutality and the murder of black people. And that was actually the first point that was implemented when Huey Newton, who was in law school at the time, created these community patrols where people could legally, at the time in California, carry a loaded rifle or shotgun as long as it wasn't in an unincorporated area. So therefore you saw the pictures of them with the weapons and that sort of thing. And they carried law books, and they basically would follow the police, and when the police would pull people over, they would basically come up to, say, look, we want to read the person you stopped their rights, that sort of thing. But what happened is the people in the neighborhoods used to come out and they saw this. So it had a lot to do with educating people, and it was very theatrical in a lot of ways. And I think Huey Newton and Bobby Seale understood that there were going to be pictures taken, and this was going to help recruiting, and this was going to help expand the presence and the understanding of what the organization was doing. But it was also going to educate black people to the fact that if the police are mistreating you, you don't have to accept that. And at the time, it was very it was a radical presentation of this, and it kind of subsided after I think it proved to be a deterrent for the police in Oakland, and it kind of spread, this message all around the country.
So when did you guys decide to stop doing those specific type of actions, showing up with arms?
Well, what happened was there was an assemblyman in California, Milford. He put forward a bill to change this, because what happened was when Huey was in law school, he was reading in, I think it was the Fishing and Game statutes in California, where this thing said, and I think it goes back to like 1886, that's saying that, you can carry a loaded rifle or shotgun in an unincorporated area. This had been on the books for years, had never been changed. Okay, he just happened to find it. Also, ironically, his law school professor was Edwin Meese, the guy who was the Attorney General under Ronald Reagan. And so he discovered this, and then so Mulford, put forward a bill to amend the fishing and game laws. And so that's when that particular kind of action stopped. And the bill was passed, and then there's the whole incident of when the party members went to lobbyists in Sacramento. They took their guns and everything, and to go and protest the passing of this bill, saying that we have a right, with regards to our constitutional amendment, we have the right to bear arms and to be able to defend ourselves if we feel we're being unjustly treated.
So do you feel like the Black Panther Party made headway on any of the 10 points that they had put forward?
Yeah, I think we were able to do quite a bit. I think in terms of the legacy and what have you, I think that, dealing with, today I think there are like the free breakfast program for school children is institutionalized. Many of the health clinics, were very, very helpful in establishing the frame of mind that you need to have these types of health clinics. In fact, the health clinic that was started here in Seattle is still open. That's a remarkable feat when you think about it. And it's become institutionalized and part of another nonprofit and that sort of thing. The awareness that we brought about with regards to sickle cell anemia, the issue in terms of protecting senior citizens who were being robbed of their Social Security and that sort of thing. And, and I think the protest mode changed, with regards to, sit-ins and civil rights and what have you was one way, that people did it. But, we also participated in boycotts and being involved in the electoral process in terms of organizing the community around broadly based issues and helping to run candidates and that sort of thing. So I think that we were successful in doing many of those things, but I think we were more successful in the individuals who were there who are still doing good work in the community. I think, locally, obviously, you have Aaron Dixon, who's he's running for, not just running for Senate, but he has a very successful youth program. And I think around the country you have people some people in Congress, like Bobby Rush and Barbara Lee. You have some people who are locally elected officials. You have many people who are academics, lawyers. I'm an urban planner today in New York City, and I build in affordable housing. And basically, the work that I'm doing, really reflects most of, with the exception of point number 7, reflects a lot of the work that would have evolved out of the 10-point platform and program.
How did the media perceive the Black Panther Party back then? Would they have been the equivalent of like a terrorist organization today?
Oh, man. If you mean today, I can't imagine. That's a really good question. I mean, for people who were being terrorized, that's a very interesting thing, and I think the media probably would have spun that. I had some questions on another one of your affiliates in New York City, WNYC, where a caller came in and said, Weren't we like Hezbollah or Hamas? And and I thought the analogy wasn't a good one. It's not. It's a lot like calling somebody a communist. And all of a sudden, once you say someone's a communist, you don't hear a word they're saying anymore, and they're, you stop paying attention to them. There's no conversation, there's no dialogue or anything. I think that's the same thing that happens with when you say that someone is a terrorist. It's a terrorist affiliation. Right away people are like, well, it doesn't matter who they are. I think the media was very much of the media was very similar than today. There wasn't much of the whole kind of the NPR type activities and that sort of thing. I'm not sure if NPR actually was that active. So I saw the history of it when I was at one of the stations in New York. I think it started like around the 70s or something like that, with Cokie Roberts and a few other people. And so you didn't have an advocate who would give you the airways. The only way you could get on the air, I think, when David Hilliard was on Meet the Press back in like 1969, and he was being accused of obviously threatening President Nixon at the time, and and David was trying to explain to him, look, you took that out of context, you know what I'm saying? And, it was rhetoric, and I think that you have a situation today where the resurgence of anything like the Black Panther Party of the 60s and 70s, if it were taken seriously, I don't think it would last very long, and obviously the media would draw conclusions that, J. Edgar Hoover said we were the biggest internal threat, to the security of this country. Well, that sounds like Homeland Security saying the same thing about Osama bin Laden, and are they saying that about Arab Americans or anybody who kind of disagrees with the war or with the policies of this country with regards to a perceived terrorist threat?
But even in today's environment, if you remove just the portion of the armed struggle,
right.
if you remove the guns, then
right.
it would seem to be a completely viable organization still.
I think the physical group is still a problem, because when you start talking about being organized in this country, you can be organized and not be dealing with any kind of armed struggle, and I still think you're going to encounter some resistance. I think this is a country where when the people who were protesting the beginning of the war, in New York, my wife went to the protest, and I've never been a big protester, right? She went to the protest, but the way the city of New York organized it with the police and orchestrated it, it was creating a hostile situation. There were so many constraints on it, so there wasn't that free expression of what it is you really wanted to do. Okay, yes, you needed a permit to march, but they were saying you couldn't go here, you couldn't go there. And it was creating a very a situation where people got arrested. I think that and there are there are these imitators. There are all these groups that you have the new Black Panther Party, and you have some other groups that are they have these names that are sounds like the Red Army Brigade, like the Fifth Column, and they're doing a lot of these types of things where it's kind of frightening. I wonder, have they read are they familiar with the history of struggle in this country? And so I think that the emergence of the physical group would really be a big problem. But I think the work that individuals do as part of other types of faith-based organizations, community development corporations, I think are going to be more viable. But I think once you start to bring everybody together and you create these like national networks, I think those are threats to the way this system is organized.
Since you've left the Black Panther Party, what things do you think have gotten better and what things do you think have gotten worse?
Actually, I guess there's, you say, okay, things are so much better because there's a larger black middle class. Matter of fact, it's a larger middle class in general, and according to Lou Dobbs, it's under attack, There are educational opportunities. There are different, more employment opportunities and what have you. But based on the statistics, things are worse. You have 40 million people in poverty. You have the kind of situation with regards to Katrina, in terms of there was the federal government's response. You have a dropout rate in high school for, say, African-American males. It's like 50% nationally. In New York City, it's like 70%. There was a study that was done, I remember, in New York City by the Community Service Society that said that 50% of black males between the ages of 18 and 64 were out of the labor force. They either had stopped looking for a job or they couldn't find a job. So I think that when we look at the statistics of today, things are much worse. However, there are situations where you have, you still have a certain amount of discrimination, but then you also have more participation in the economy, in different types of livelihoods. So you have a much more diverse group who's involved in the day-to-day activities of this society, But I still think that, and like I said, and you have you have a group of people that run this country that want us to believe that they just came up with these ideas, but we know they've been researching this stuff for years. They've coming up with this whole axis of evil was something that a think tank, or the Project for a New American Century, came up with. And these are the people who are running the country now. So I think that it's really difficult to put things forth. We thought things were worse when Nixon was around and when Reagan was around, but the guys today are we might want to say that they're idiots, but they are much better organized, with regards to implementing their policies, I think that probably the one thing that I think is the most frightening of today is the whole housing situation, especially with regard to affordable housing. You have we're coming to the sunset for maybe it could be millions of units of affordable housing units that are project-based Section 8. The use of them are going to be expiring. The owners of these project-based Section 8s are going to be able to opt out of the program and go market rate. If there isn't a policy created, and I know that Senator Schumer was involved in terms of maintaining this, if there isn't a policy created that protects this, we can have a displacement of people who become homeless that's probably far greater than the magnitude of what happened in Katrina. So, and these are policies that are being put forward by the present administration. We want to privatize, and so we're going to get rid of the Section 8, but you don't have there's no job creation program. People aren't going to have better jobs. They're spending more than the allotted 30% of your income that you're supposed to spend for rental or mortgage payments. People are spending 50 and 60% of their income, so they have less disposable income. So, these are some of the things that are happening today that are major threats. And there's a need to be organized. And only the way to respond is you have to be organized. But if you get too organized, then there's going to be, a belief that, you are organizing for something that is say, un-American or something along those lines. So, but I think that, there are a lot of positive things that have happened, but the societal conditions are just as worse as they were, say, 30 years ago.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you, Mike.
We've just been talking with Flores Forbes. He is the Chief Strategic Officer at Abyssinian Development Corporation in New York City. and author of the new book, Will You Die With Me? My Life in the Black Panther Party.